Looks like we got a pretty stable number here. We may have more folks join us. But just kicking off the webinar series here. So today we're going to have Eva Hoskin talk about battery storage and solar on our Capital Region Climate Action webinar series. Just a little bit of logistics. We are going to take questions at the end. There is a Q&A box on your webinar at the bottom. You can ask questions as the webinar goes along, but we won't be able to answer them till the end. And with that, I'm going to introduce our Director of Sustainability, Todd Pabozzi, who's going to talk to you about the Climate Action Webinar Series and why we're all here today.
Yes, thank you, Tara, and thanks to everyone for joining. And just to set the context then, so what we are doing at CDRPC is, and if you are, this is your first series, first of the webinar that you've joined, we had one last month, and we're going to be having one on the first Wednesday of each month going forward through to October. And the purpose of the webinar series is as ongoing engagement for our climate action plan. So CDRPC was funded through EPA to develop a climate action plan several years ago. The plan is now complete. And Tara, you can switch slides. And we have on our website at CDRPC a link to the plan. So you can download and view the plan, and we encourage you to do so if you have not at this stage. And also, we have set up a series of online tools that are complements to the plan. So we have a greenhouse gas inventory that was developed as part of the plan, and we have a dashboard that allows communities to be able to look at their emissions and also to export that information for their specific community and to be able to view other communities and the region as a whole or counties individually. So a useful tool for documenting the emissions in the region by community. We also have a portal, a climate action portal, which is tracking a variety of different indicators on how the communities are doing in the region at addressing greenhouse gas mitigation, which is the focus of this particular plan. It's not adaptation and resilience. It's just focusing on reducing greenhouse gases and the different measures that you can utilize to do that. And so we developed 67 different measures by industry sector. Tara, if you switch slides. And so this is just an excerpt of some that are relevant to today's session. Electrification readiness and expanding local renewable generation through land use and energy planning, and also other issues tied to grid capacity and utility partnerships. So these are several of the measures. And again, there are 67 different measures, really best practices that are in our plan. They're voluntary best practices, and they're targeted to communities and the kinds of things communities can do to reduce their impacts. And so with that, I'll turn it back to Tara and to Eva then.
So now I'm going to introduce our speaker today, who is Eva Hoskin, a clean energy advisor with Climate Action Associates LLC. And she's also a subcontractor to NYSERDA's Clean Energy Communities program. She provides support to communities across Eastern New York in siting and permitting projects responsibly and in line with local goals. Eva?
Hi, folks. How are we doing today? I think we should be able to see my slides right now. Um, Tara, if you just want to confirm real quick.
You're good.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so thanks for joining. We'll talk about planning for solar energy and battery energy storage today. There is a lot to talk about. So as Tara said, let's try to hold off for questions at the end. Um, we'll start by going through solar and then transition into battery storage. I tried my best to sprinkle in examples of pieces of laws from capital region communities throughout the presentation. So we'll see some of those as we go. And so just a little bit about myself. My name's Eva again. I work for a company called Climate Action Associates. I am a subcontractor to NYSERDA with the Clean Energy Communities program. And more specifically, I do a lot of my work directly alongside the Clean Energy Siting team. And a little bit about the Clean Energy Siting team is they're a resource for local governments. They create materials, resources, and tools. They host webinars, provide technical assistance for local communities navigating clean energy issues all around the state. Here on the screen, you'll see a couple examples of some of the guidebooks that they've put together. So we have one about incorporating clean energy in your comprehensive plan. There's the energy storage guidebook, there's solar guidebook, and wind as well. And there are lots of tools. The team essentially acts as like a free consultant to help municipalities with their clean energy issues. So, as I said earlier, our agenda here today, this is very broad and there's a lot that we'll dive into within each of these subjects, but we'll start with just a little bit of local land use and clean energy just as sort of a primer. So to start off, and many of you might be familiar, but I want to talk about permitting authority within New York State when it comes to renewable energy projects. So as you probably know, projects that are renewable energy generators, so like solar or wind, that are above 25 megawatts, those will be permitted through ORES, the Office of Renewable Energy Siting. And then anything below that threshold, anything less than 25 megawatts is permitted through your local government. With battery storage, it's a little bit different. It's actually, for the most part, permitted at the local level. The only exception is if a battery is paired with a renewable energy project that's above 25 megawatts, then that will together go through ORES. But aside from that, it's local permitting authority. And this just shows some examples of projects that are permitted at the local level. So up top, we see some solar some solar projects that are under 25 megawatts, like rooftop or community scale solar farms. And then below, we'll see that the permitting authority for batteries, as mentioned, is pretty broad. We have anything from a residential system that sits in a garage all the way up to, we'll see, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but the utility scale battery storage projects that look just kind of like shipping containers sitting together. So another piece of, context that I want to give, and it's important to start when you're when you're thinking about creating your clean energy regulations, is to think about your existing utility infrastructure in your town, and it helps you to think about where projects actually are viable, where they might fit, quote, within your community. A lot of these projects are very heavily based around where the utility infrastructure lies. And so if we just use Stillwater as a quick example, we can see that they have their red dotted lines are their high voltage transmission lines. And those types of lines, we can think about them as like a highway. They're the high power and they bring power from A to B far distances. We can see their substations. And then we can see their distribution lines, which carry power of lesser voltages, and we can kind of think of it as like county roads. So just as an example, we'll take a look and see that Stillwater has a large-scale solar project that was built right along and kind of right around the high voltage transmission line because large-scale solar needs to plug into a power that can accept that much energy that it generates. And then similarly, a battery energy storage project of a utility scale size needs to be located towards high voltage infrastructure as well. So you'll see that there was a battery storage project that's located next to one of their substations, and we'll see a picture of that eventually in this presentation. So therefore, then we can take a look at our existing utility infrastructure and overlay it with our zoning. And it helps us to figure out how we can appropriately regulate clean energy in our community. It helps you to think about what makes sense. Do we think that, a project where there's a transmission line here in a high density residential would make sense for a solar project? Probably not. There's not the space. So it allows us to just get a good visual and a lay of the land of what's viable and what makes sense for us. I used Saratoga Springs. I happen to live here. I just made this map recently, so it was fresh. But if you think that a map like this would be helpful for your community, reach out and let me know because I'd be happy to make one for you. And then with this, we can think about multiple ways that we want to implement our regulations. We could use a conventional zoning approach where we designate that solar is allowable in X, Y, and Z districts. Or we could think about making an overlay or a floating zone in which we create technology-specific districts that apply on top of the existing ones. Therefore, we don't have to abide by the existing boundaries of your current zoning. Okay, so we'll dive into solar now. That was our little primer. Solar's like the first clean energy that most communities end up coming across, and for that reason, the guidebook and the model law have been around for a lot longer and have been able to mature and be adapted as we've learned more over time. Here's just a little look at our chapters. There's so much in here, permitting tools. There are chapters on pilots and seeker, decommissioning, pretty much everything. We're going to focus on the model law for now. And as I mentioned, it has been adapted over time. So there's been some updates, such as, guidance on certain zoning approaches, like the graphic I just showed you, certain clarifying aspects to distinction of sizes of projects and modifications to ag land regulations and such like that. Again, just stuff that has been learned as we've continued to be permitting solar over the past few years. So, some of the things that we want to really mainly consider when we're thinking about creating regulations for clean energy are pretty much like the size, the location, the zoning, the bulk standards. What do we want the lot coverage to be, or how tall? How much farmland will this take up is a big one, which we'll address. The visual aspect that is, a concern for a lot of folks, and we will address that as well. And to show you, this is kind of a table of contents of the model law, and we'll be focusing on the definitions, permitting requirements for tier 3 and 4, since we're talking about large scale today. But I also want to emphasize throughout that this model law is non-prescriptive. It is meant to be tailored. It is meant to be changed around, edited to make sense for your community. And you'll see throughout that there are some kind of like fill in the blank areas if I have a copy and pasted part of the law, just showing you that it's not written out for you. It is just a framework that lays out all the considerations that we want you to think about that we think are important for protecting your community. Excuse me. Okay. So I'll go into definitions now. And so we define tier 1 projects as the smallest projects. They're typically a residential project or some sort of building integrated structure. They will be under 25 kilowatts. And what the model law recommends is that you permit it, you allow for this in all zoning districts because we want to allow folks to be able to use this on their local business or their home or what have you, without throughout the community. And we have a model or a unified solar permit, which we recommend that communities can adopt to just streamline the permitting process for these types of projects. We have our tier two projects, which are ground mounted, and we recommend uh, setting the capacity to be up to 1 megawatt or to take up about 8 acres in size. They're generally designed to serve on-site needs, so to support the energy, um, to produce energy for the building that they're associated with, rather than exporting the power to the grid. These are similarly permitted as the tier one structures with just a few additional requirements, such as perhaps some screening, etc. And then we have our tier three projects, which are larger ground mounted projects. We recommend that you set the threshold to be up to about 5 megawatts or 40 acres in size. And then we have our tier four systems, which are the rest, all projects that are greater than 5 megawatts or 40 acres. And then as a reminder, when we hit that 25 megawatt threshold, those projects will be permitted by the Office of Renewable Energy Siting. And we want to think about a much more comprehensive, rigorous permitting structure for projects of this size. And I'll go into those now. So the permitting process would start by choosing allowable areas for solar energy, kind of a callback to the mapping tools I was showing you. We want to outline our approval process, including public hearings, timeframes, and we'll see again some of those fill in the blank spots for you to tailor it to make it make sense with your existing frameworks. And then just wanted to show you these this list on the side where it kind of shows all of the considerations that the model law gives you to fill in for regulating solar projects. And so here's one of our local examples. I just wanted to show you the town of Coymans. I hope I said that correctly. And I'll just show you that they define the permitting mechanism, they define where, and the use of a site plan application, which I think I forgot to mention, but that's an important piece that we like to include as well. And tier four energy system, or excuse me, solar systems are subject to the same standards for the most part of tier three projects. However, there are a few additional requirements. We suggest that you need to schedule a pre-application hearing with the municipal officials at least 60 days before an application is actually submitted. We want to see a community engagement plan and also have some higher standards for setbacks and agricultural thresholds. So to dive into some of these specifics, for agricultural resources, it's kind of a big issue that a lot of folks think about when seeing large solar projects covering a lot of land. For tier three, we recommend that there is a 50% limit on using prime agricultural soils. This can be limited, or this limit can be surpassed if the project has like an on-site farm operation going. So this is where agrivoltaics can come in. And then, of course, there's the New York State agriculture and markets guidelines that need to be abided by for construction, monitoring, and decommissioning. For tier 4 systems, it's pretty similar. However, we extend the language from just prime agricultural land to active agricultural land. These take up more space, and there's still viable and great farming operations that can be occurring on land that's not designated prime soil, right? So we brought in that definition by making it active farmlands. Again, we can reduce that by integrating agrivoltaics, and the ag and markets guidelines will apply here as well. For screening and visibility, we want to think about the size of the project. It does make a difference. So if it's less than 10 acres in size, it's we want to have a little bit more leniency, I would say, or that's what is suggested. So to the extent reasonably practical, we want to use like some landscape architecture features like burns or landscaping, some screening methods, but for systems that are greater than 10 acres, we want to require a visual assessment of the impacts of views from like public roadways and adjacent properties. We want a line of sight profile analysis. Each board can require additional types of analysis. There's digital view shed reports. Um, we can, or we would like to have developers also submit a full screening and landscaping plan, detailing locations and elevations, heights, plant species, and materials. Um, and that way we can kind of protect our visual impact on the community. Another big topic that comes up a lot is what's going to happen at the end of the project life. The model law has a nice plan that's in the appendix that helps detail what a decommissioning plan should look like. But importantly, within the law itself, we want to outline certain mechanisms like establishing that financials will be secured for project end of life. We want to establish how much. So we would say 115% of an estimated decommissioning cost. And we can get those estimates from a third-party engineer team. And also how often this number is revisited or updated. So as you'll see here, it says revisited every 5 years and updated as needed. We just want to make sure that there is some sort of mechanism for keeping it current with inflation costs and material cost changes over time. So I think we have an example here. Yeah. So for the town of Monroe in Saratoga County, we see that they establish the method of obtaining the financial security, um, and they value they value uh, the security by taking the estimated cost and using 115% of that. And then they have a 2% escalator annually for the life of the project to keep it secure and current. And then I think this might be my last one for solar for now. I felt it was important to include language around ownership changes. I think a lot of folks who might have solar in their town already might be familiar that projects can change hands sometimes. So this is an important piece to keep in our law. We want to ensure that there would be a written agreement to the decommissioning plans that were previously agreed upon in the permitting stage. And then also we want to make sure that there's notification within 30 days that the project did change ownership. I say you could even take it a step further and say that we need to make sure there's an established point of contact that we can reach with that notification as well. And then, of course, any violation will result in same assessment of civil and criminal penalties already laid out in the existing enforcement provisions of the code in the municipality. Okay, now we'll move on to battery energy storage. Excuse me. So, as we discussed earlier, all battery projects that are not paired with a renewable energy generator are permitted locally. And so it's really important to adopt or think about adopting a regulation uh, proactively in case a project comes in. And it can help you regulate projects from residential all the way to utility scale. The Energy Storage Guidebook was recently updated, and there are several new chapters. One of my favorites is just chapter one, the frequently asked questions. I'm sending those to communities a lot because it's just such a great first place to start and a good place to get some factual information when there's a lot of misinformation going around. So we're again going to focus on the model law here. But before we jump into the model law, I do want to tell you that due to the adoption of the recent fire code, the town or every town now has the highest, most rigorous safety standards in the nation, backing them to protect your safety through the New York State Fire Code that was adopted last year and went into effect January 1st of this year. So let's go into land use and planning considerations for battery storage. So you remember a similar slide that we saw earlier when thinking about renewable energy. For battery storage, we kind of erase that visual and agricultural impact area. It doesn't take up a lot of space. These are small modular projects that aren't subject to taking hundreds, if not thousands, of acres of farmland. However, we do add in the other aspects, which would be fire safety and incident management training. And these are largely addressed by the fire code as well, so that's great for us. But our set of considerations are a little bit different this time around. So here's the table of contents for the model law. It looks really similar. And again, we'll be focusing on these highlighted sections. And we do start again by defining two tiers to regulate projects appropriately by their size. So right now, the model law says that tier one batteries are anything less than or equal to up to 600 kilowatt hours. And then for tier two projects, it would be anything above that threshold. If we want to get creative, you could think about carving out an additional tier for residential projects, which would 80 kilowatt hours would be a good suggestion for. That's a threshold that comes from the residential fire code, and a good way to think about considering some other options. And we'll just flip through some examples here. So here are some residential projects. We see some typical, areas of placement. We see like a utility room and a garage. Here are some kind of medium to large commercial size projects. We have, I think I missed a slide. Okay, sorry. We have a project on the left here is associated with a community solar project. So it's supporting the energy generation on that site. We also have a project here. It's a standalone battery in Brooklyn. And it's a cool picture, I think, because you'll see it is on top of the arena that it is serving. And it's also directly adjacent to two high-rise residential apartment buildings and has been successfully in operation for years at this point. And then we have our large commercial to grid scale projects. And another little local shout out is this 20 megawatt project in Stillwater, and it happens to be tied for the highest capacity of energy in the state for battery storage projects right now. All right. So, um, tier one will probably want to do a little bit more of a streamlined permitting approach again. There was the unified solar permit that I mentioned earlier that we can use for solar energy projects that are of residential size. We do have a similar type of permit called the model battery energy storage permit, I believe, that helps you to streamline projects in the same way. Um, but again, for the tier two projects, we do want to use another more refined process. So we'll use our tools like site plan and special use permit again. And these include decommissioning, and we get the public hearing processes through the site plan review and special use permitting. We want to make sure we are enforcing compliance with the fire code and avoiding duplication of existing fire code requirements. So here's a local highlight, an example of a permitting, the kind of the opening statement to permitting tier two battery storage in Westerlo, in Albany County. So we see that they define that the permitting mechanism they wanted to be subject to site plan approval, special use permit issued by the planning board, and it also highlights, sorry, I thought I might have had arrows, also highlights that they're allowable in all zoning districts aside from the hamlets. So shout out to Westerlo. And this slide probably looks pretty familiar from before, but we just want to show you that we again want to highlight the same type of things. We'll probably, I think our next slide will go into decommissioning. So let's, yes. So again, we want to highlight our method of ensuring available funds for decommissioning and site restoration, a method to keep the decommissioning cost current. And I believe we have another local example. The town of Germantown in Columbia County. They require 1.25, so 125% times the estimated decommissioning cost with a 2% annual escalator. And they then go on to define the different types of financial securities that could be allowable, whether it's like a line of credit, a bond, such like that. And then I just wanted to show you a snippet of the suggested site plan requirements. It's similar to the site plan requirements of a solar project, but again, we'll be requiring submission of these safety aspects, which will luckily be pretty much covered by the fire code as well. And then we're going to move on to talk a little bit about the fire code. Before we do that, I do want to make sure that we remember to kind of distinguish what the purpose of a land use law is and what the purpose of the fire code safety mechanisms are. So they're quite different, but we can kind of it can kind of get a little convoluted when we're thinking about land use laws when it comes to battery storage. It happens a lot and it's easy, but let's just try to keep it separated. So the primary difference is the land use law governs where and what you can build. And then the fire code governs how that building and structure is designed, maintained, and operated to prevent fires. So here's just some key highlights of the fire code's like latest version that was adopted. So it was used or it was created using recommendations from the Interagency Fire Safety Working Group that was formed in 2023 to study projects and failure incidents and to come up with some robust codes. They tightened up on some language. There's a few things where, signage requirements are better and contact information. There's now mandatory peer review from third-party subject matter experts for projects that are above 600 kilowatt hours. And that's paid for by the developer, and that's in the code. So you're not alone when you're reviewing these applications. There are people who are experts in this who will have to be reviewing that for you. There's annual on-site training for first responders that needs to be offered for each site for local firefighters and first responders. So there's a lot of active involvement between project applicants and local first responders, and that's required now. We also have oh, yeah. And then with that, they'll be creating an emergency response plan together to have something ready in case anything were to happen. And then lastly, the project owner has to pay for, again, and have a hazard support personnel on contract who's able to be, if there is an incident, they have to be dispatched within 15 minutes of an incident, and they have to be able to arrive at within 4 hours of the incident. This is important because a lot of our communities have volunteer firefighters and they can't really sit and babysit a fire for hours or maybe a day or two. So the hazard support specialist is able to be there and relieve the local firefighters and sit there with it until the project is decommissioned. All right. And here's a list of all of the applicable national codes and standards that that battery storage systems have to abide by. This is from the cellular level all the way to the way that it's installed. I do not really know about each and every one of these, but I do know people who do that would probably love to sit and talk with you about it. But I just wanted to show you how much these are regulated by national and in some cases international standards. All right, so we have here I just have a link for to be able to view the fire code. We also have some resources from the Office of Fire Prevention and Control. They have a battery storage training for firefighters, and they're doing these trainings around the state. I actually had the pleasure of going to one myself. They're popping up if you can click that link, which I think you'll be able to get these slides when I'm finished. If you click that link and you filter your search to battery or lithium ion, you'll be able to see where they're coming to do this training around the state. And if they're not doing one in your area, you can reach out and ask them to come and present to your area. And then if anybody wants a deeper dive on the fire safety working group or those codes that I was talking about, like that list of long codes, they'll go into them, or just the fire code in general and all of the fire safety working groups recommendations. This webinar from last spring is super comprehensive. It's long, but it goes into it all. And I think it's really your best way to immerse yourself in fire code knowledge. So I'll end here with some recommendations. We want to learn about the fire code again. Another great piece of information is that NYSERDA is almost complete with a training for local code enforcement officers in order to learn how to enforce the fire code. It's only as good as it is enforced, so that training will be coming soon. I'm not exactly sure when, but I will be sure to be doing some email blasts, so I'm sure you might be hearing from me. If we're exploring other structures of writing our law or looking for information, just recommend that you use you think about where your sources are and make sure you're getting credible information. Like I said, there's a lot out there. And then we want to lastly consider and account for the reality of the system benefits. I didn't really have time to go into so much of that side of things, but we do want to enable our constituents to be able to use these types of technologies and benefit from the cost savings, what have you, if they want to. So we just want to be kind of considerate of our constituents here. And then I think we are done for now and we can move on to Q&A. I do have a colleague here from NYSERDA, Ian Latimer, who is here to answer questions with me. And we can go ahead and, I guess, get started.
Great. Thanks, Eva. All right, so we'll start with the first question here. Do you have any examples of how municipalities that have gone through the decommissioning process show that it actually works?
Well, I don't have any examples, and thank you for the question. I don't have any examples offhand because a lot of projects haven't reached their end of life yet, but there have been a couple fire incidents in which projects would have to be decommissioned after that perhaps Ian could speak to. But aside from that, I'm not aware of anyone that has gotten to that process yet.
Hi guys, Ian Latimer from NYSERDA's Clean Energy Siting team here. Yeah, Eva, you're spot on there. So to date, we're not aware of any projects that have been decommissioned in accordance with the decommissioning guidelines required in the fire code and the guidance required in the model law. Because these systems are, relatively new and have been installed in the last decade with an operating life that exceeds where we are today in 2026. There is information regarding like large scale project decommissioning for particularly there was a very large battery fire out in California early in 2025 that has been getting decommissioned over the last year in conjunction with the US EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. So there is some information there about that decommissioning process, which we can pass along with the slides, but we don't have any examples in New York State specifically at this time.
Thank you. So the next question is, what does the requirement to furnish hazard support personnel mean in practice? Are they arriving with their own firefighting equipment? You mentioned to relieve local firefighters to continue fighting the fire. Just curious what it looks like and if you have any examples of that being implemented and how it worked out.
Yeah, I do know that that was implemented in December when there was an incident down in Warwick and the hazard team was able to get there. Ian, I'm gonna call on you again because I'm not sure what type of equipment they bring themselves.
Yeah, so I think that it's gonna depend. In the incident that you're responding to back in December, I do not believe that there was additional teams and equipment that was called on site. I think that the hazard support personnel, the support was really the operative word there, right? So the owner of the project dispatched support that was able to monitor the site and capable of notifying local first responders and county hazmat if there were, a reignition or any need for them to return to the site. And typically that's going to be the role that's provided by that hazard support personnel. To my knowledge, the main function there is really around supporting those local and county first responders, not so much responding as like, a separate sort of like dedicated, firefighting team or something like that. I will say that one of the really critical parts of the fire code update includes, pre-commissioning consultation with local first responders so that they understand what, if any, equipment is needed to respond to an incident at the site. So if and where you've got, volunteer or local first responders that are concerned about, the equipment that they may have on hand or the level of staffing that may need to, they may need to have to respond to an incident, that is something that should be identified as part of the development process with the applicant. So I would just say, where you have concerns about like local staff capacity or local equipment to respond to an incident, the process is designed that those should be conversations that are happening far before a project gets switched online.
Great,
Thanks,
thank
Eva.
you. So the next one is, in the past, I heard the solar formula was 1 megawatt per 5 acres, and now it's 8. I'm assuming that means 1 megawatt per 8 acres. I think that's what he's referring to.
Okay.
Sounds.
I was just gonna say it's often like people will refer to a range of anywhere from 5 to 8 acres per megawatt. The reason there being that it really just depends on site-specific design considerations as well as like local law specific considerations, right? So if you have a solar zoning law in place that has lot coverage requirements, that then impacts the density of the project build out, the number of acres that that project may need to be spread across based on its ability to comply with local requirements. Similarly, if you have a site that includes like maybe prime soils or wetlands or sensitive environmental considerations that need to be avoided when you're designing the site, theoretically then that 1 megawatt array could take up a larger acreage. So I'd say over time, it's actually project density is increasing because the panels are becoming more efficient. So you can pack more energy production into a smaller footprint. It really just depends on the sort of site characteristics and the zoning law. So we often say 5 to 8 acres per megawatt, and it's really kind of a range depending on project specifics.
Great, thank you. This one's a technology related question. So, how soon do you expect BESS technologies using batteries made with sodium instead of lithium will be coming online in the market? And how much safer are sodium technologies, and what other factors about them are important to know?
Eva, you want me to hop in?
Yeah, you go for it.
It's a great question. I think anyone who gets news alerts or reads news websites about energy knows that battery technologies are cropping up all the time, and there's always a lot of questions about what's next and what are we solving for with these technology changes. I think sodium ion batteries have a lot of promise. Certainly fire safety is a huge part of that, right? So the different electrolytes used in a sodium ion battery have different, fire safety profiles. And I think that they're seen as, significantly reducing some of the fire safety risk. The problem is that they're not widely commercially available right now. It's, that sodium ion, iron air, zinc halide. There's a few different battery chemistries that are, very much in mature stages of research and development, but are not yet commercially available. So unfortunately, I don't have a magic 8 ball to know when they will become available. I'll say that, even in the last 5 years, the types of lithium ion batteries that are being used have changed. So it could be that, in 5 years, we're talking about sodium ion that's widely commercially available. But as of right now, if you look across the world, the capacity for producing those batteries at scale to be able to be installed is just not there. NYSERDA, we have an innovation group here that does fund like demonstration and pilot projects for a lot of different things, including different battery chemistries. So we've got some research projects that are being funded. But as of right now, those are talking about earlier stages of technologies, not things that are widely available. So I would say, in summary, I don't know the timing at which sodium ion becomes, competitive and available across the commercialization landscape. I would guess, not for a couple of years, based on the size of lithium ion battery manufacturing capacity in the US and in the world. But I think, everyone is in favor of building out the safest batteries that we can. And so hopefully, lithium ion batteries continue to improve the way that they have, very much so. And hopefully other technologies emerge as well.
Great, thank you. Another question here is, can you speak to the decommissioning requirements as it pertains to returning land to its use in agricultural production? We often hear this question concern from residents.
Yeah, so within your decommissioning agreements and plans, you will get like detailed step-by-step processes of how deep they will be going in to extract pieces of infrastructure, as well as the process of which they'll be resoiling that land to accommodate for the decompaction or to decompact and to put the soil kind of back to a more agricultural use, if that's what the previous case was. Ian, you might be able to opine a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say, to the point of, obviously it's always nice to answer questions, but it's also helpful to have information in hand, and we can accompany these slides with some really good information on this. So the Department of Agriculture and Markets, they have what they call their like solar mitigation guidelines. I know that that's a bunch of bureaucratic words. Basically, Ag and Markets, the regulatory agency that oversees programs related to ag land in New York, they have a set of requirements for solar project construction and decommissioning that includes, how you are stockpiling your topsoil, making sure that we're not removing that from the site, the depth to which you need to trench your cabling and any other utility equipment. And so that's going to specify to what depth, as Eva was mentioning, things need to be removed as part of the decommissioning process, restoration of topsoil that's stored on site, things like that. So that, I would say, is like the best place that we can direct you to very specific requirements. Our programs at NYSERDA and our model laws reference those decommissioning requirements as put together by Ag and Markets. So from our perspective, that's really the gold standard for what you should be looking for in terms of like step by step how projects are going to be required to do that decommissioning on agricultural land. So we'll make sure to send that along to accompany these slides when they get sent out.
Great, thank you. The next one is from a well-informed person questioning the New York State Assembly Bill A6955C, and its BESS setbacks specifically. So if this was enacted, how would it affect NYSERDA's current model law guidance, especially where the guidebook recommends deferring to underlying zoning setbacks and site-specific safety analysis?
Ian, I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, well, I mean, first I'll say that, regrettably, there's a number of different battery storage laws in various stages in the legislature, which I'm, not privy to and don't know too much about, including the specifics of the setback requirements in this one. In terms of how it changes, NYSERDA resources, I mean, a state law that would be enacted that could theoretically automatically apply across the state would change everything about how the model law works in practice. I mean, if the, to the extent the model law says that you're going to rely on existing setback requirements in those districts, and a law automatically applies certain setback requirements to a community, then there would be no conflict, because it's just, your existing requirements as it exists under your law and the state law would be in effect. So it wouldn't necessarily change anything about, the implementation of the model law. I do think that my guess, if I recall, is that the setbacks are pretty significant. So it would certainly affect, where projects are able to be proposed and built in the state of New York, with particular impact to more urban communities and more dense like villages and certain parts of towns where you've got more dense development. The reality is that electrical infrastructure and where things are placed is often related to load, right? You've got more transmission lines, distribution lines, and substations in places where energy demand and need is greater, which includes more dense residential and commercial areas. And so to some extent, we're always trying to balance the proximity of built infrastructure with where people are and how we're impacting people. And so, I'd say that proximity to sensitive uses is a consideration, even if that law, doesn't advance out of committee and pass the legislature. But this is a good reminder to me to go look at the specifics of the setbacks that are proposed in that legislation. So thank you for the reminder to check on that.
Great, thank you. And it looks like we've actually run to the end of our questions. Unless anyone else wants to throw anything in there, you are welcome. This is your time to get things answered. We do have a minute or two. But if you don't want to ask live, you can always follow up with Eva. She's happy to answer questions and then also support your community a little deeper if you'd like. So let me just give it a minute here. Make sure there's nothing burning in anyone's mind. And while I do that, I'm just going to give a plug for our next webinar that we have, which is going to be June 3rd. CDRPC is hosting our next climate action webinar series, which is going to be on online tools for sustainability planning. We're going to talk about our NRI mapper that we are developing, which we'll release very soon with a registration link for this webinar so you can explore it. But it should be a really good tool to help communities develop their own NRIs in the capital region with this free mapping tool, as well as our climate action portal, which we've highlighted in the past on other webinars, but is a great tool to help explore regional progress when it comes to climate action, including solar and battery storage. And there's a great map on there that we just created related to the work Eva's doing, which is about where battery locations are sited throughout the region, as well as capacity and things like that. So we do encourage you to check that out, but we will dive into that on June 3rd. And we are going to send the slides. That was the question, absolutely, as well as some of the other resources that Ian mentioned about agriculture. And then where can municipalities view and download GIS data for transmission lines is a question.
They are tough to find. There's a map called Open Infrastructure Map. If you Google that, you can see them.
Yeah, I'll say, to that point, so that is data that was previously very available through federal data sets that are managed through the U.S. Energy Information Administration. There may still be a mapper online, but I was having trouble. The federal government has, widely made access to federal data much harder to come by in the last year and a half, particularly for reasons of, supposed national security and energy security concerns. There is also a mapping tool that was developed by Scenic Hudson, the solar mapping tool, which aspects of that rely on federal data, I believe, are also out of date. But it does have sort of a static snapshot in time from when it was last located of where high voltage transmission infrastructure exists in the state. So yeah, we can send along a couple of example links, but I'll say it is challenging to find. To the extent that you're interested in, getting a snapshot of that and you're having some trouble finding it, please reach out to Eva and myself, and we can do our best to assist.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that again that in terms of it being in GIS data, you kind of have to create your shapefile matching the lines that you find. Like Ian said, there's not a great way to just have the data anymore.
Great. Well, I don't see any other questions here, and it is 1 o'clock. So we will wrap up here. And thank you so much to Eva and Ian for speaking to everyone today. And again, we'll send out the slides and the resources and a registration for next month's webinar shortly. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.